Alright, ya magnificent bastards. Do you like corporations? Do you wish people would stop paying taxes and instead give more money to you? Do you dream of becoming an utter fucking omnipresent mega corporation that not only has an entire army, but somehow manages to get itself a seat in the government before immediately being thrown into the most violent galaxy imaginable? Well, today's video is especially made for you. So today, lads, we're seeing if the CIS from Star Wars can survive the Warhammer 40k galaxy. Can they conquer it? Can they survive it? Or is it just going to be an entire video of screaming B1s? Well then, lads, let's dive in. For those who do not know or need a refresher, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, or the CIS, was basically a bunch of corporations collectively deciding they were fucking sick of paying taxes to the Republic. Led by Count Dooku, funded by greedy mega corporations, and powered by a truly stupid number of droids. Their goal was simple: tell Coruscant to go fuck itself. And when I say army, I mean trillions of droids. B1s, droidicas, tanks, starfighters, massive warships, and General Grievous, a wheezing murder bicycle who somehow spent his free time turning Jedi into Swiss cheese. At their peak, around about the third year of the Clone Wars, the CIS was genuinely a terrifying military power. They were giving the Republic a proper kicking, and without Palpatine secretly playing both sides, they might have actually won. Instead, the droids got switched off and the CIS became history's greatest lesson in why you don't pop a bloody off switch on your entire army. Welcome to Warhammer 40,000, a galaxy where there's only war, everyone is clinically insane, and the Grim Reaper has probably submitted his resignation. The Imperium of Man wants to kill everything that isn't human, including plenty of things that are. Their Emperor is a 10,000-year-old corpse strapped to a golden toilet because apparently Imperial healthcare is fucking useless. Then you've got the Orcs who believe reality works through sheer fucking confidence. Tyranids who want to eat everything. Necrons who told death to piss off. Eldar, ancient space elves having a catastrophic midlife crisis, and Chaos, which has decided reality is merely a suggestion. Add Space Marines, Demons, Titans, planetary superweapons, and enough firepower to make the Death Star look like a fucking sparkler. So yeah, everyone's fucked, the galaxy's on fire, and somehow we're the idiots buying plastic crack to recreate it. Alright, lads and lasses. Here's something I've realised after making all these bloody crossover videos. I don't think I've actually ever been answering the fucking question. Usually, I lore dump both factions into your skull, smash them together at the end, and call it a good bloody day. But this is a crossover, so let's actually cross the fucking over. If the CIS is going to survive 40k, we need to know more than just who's got the bigger guns. Also, for those who need to know for some reason, we're running the CIS during the third years of the Clone Wars, when they were at their peak, while 40k is set in the current 42nd millennia. Why? Because it's the most fun option, and I've got the most amount of information to work with. So, to the battlefield! Now, we need to know how the CIS is getting there, what they are bringing with them, where they're establishing themselves, what worlds can they actually conquer, how they build their infrastructure to survive, whether their ideology can win people over, and whether their generals can keep the whole fucking circle running. Basically, we're going to figure out exactly what the CIS needs to survive in this galaxy before we start throwing the entire bloody thing at them. So, first things first, lads. The Space Forces. How many ships are we talking about? There aren't any nice, convenient CIS fleet totals lying around, so we're going to work with averages. Take these numbers with a large pinch of salt, because I'm essentially doing intergalactic accounting with incomplete paperwork. Using average garrisons and maximum outputs we can reasonably estimate, we're looking at roughly 3.5 capital ships, 16 mid-range ships, and 63 fighters per world. Dooku also claimed around 10,000 systems were willing to join the Separatists. So we'll use that as our baseline. Now multiply those averages across 10,000 systems and we get roughly 35,000 capital ships, 160 mid-range vessels, and 630,000 fighters, giving us around 825,000 combat craft. And because I know I've probably forgotten something somewhere, let's round that bastard up to 1 million ships. So the CIS is bringing a fucking navy. Now here's the important bit. The moment this fleet arrives, there's going to be a fucking first contact. Let's assume the Imperium sees this mysterious fleet and immediately sides. Yep, that's probably chaos, because of course they do. So they send an average Imperial Navy fleet to investigate, while the CIS, having just landed in a completely unknown territory, send an average fleet to scout out the area. For the CIS, we're looking at one Lucrehulk class heavy command ship at 3,170 meters, two Providence class carrier destroyers at 1,088 meters, 5 Recusant class light destroyers at 1,187 meters, and 50 Munificent class frigates at 825 meters, giving us a total of 22 ships. The Imperial Navy brings 2 battle cruisers, such as the Mars or Overlord, at roughly 5,400 meters, 15 cruisers, such as the Lunar, at 5,000 meters, or the Dauntless at 4,500 meters, and 10 light escorts like the Firestorm frigate at around 1,800 meters, giving them 27 ships. And yes, there's an absolute fucking enormous size difference here. The Imperial ships are considerably larger, but does that actually mean that they're better? That's what we're about to find out. First though, here's the important question. How the fuck are they actually going to use these ships? Because having millions of ships on paper means nothing if your strategy is point them at the enemy and shout, fucking go! The CIS fleet is built around concentrated forward firepower. The Munificent forms the backbone of the battle line, keeping their noses pointed forward at the enemy, unleashing coordinated volleys, while the Recusant punches into weak points and forces their heavier guns forward on the enemy capital ships. Behind them, the Providence provides fighter cover, bombers, and additional firepower, while the Lucrehulk sits safely in the center, acting as command and logistics and troop deployment platform, while soaking up punishment like the galaxy's fattest fucking sponge. The key is to keep the formation together, because once the Munificents get flanked, things start going horribly wrong. The Imperial Navy fights rather differently. Their cruisers form the main battle line, using their shields, broadsides, and lances to maintain sustained fire against the enemy, while the battle cruisers act as heavy hitters and command ships, concentrating their enormous firepower against priority targets. The escorts form a protective screen around the larger vessels, intercept fighters, and prevent enemy ships from getting easy access to the fleet's vulnerable points. Rather than relying on one giant flanking act, the Imperials can spread their formation and use overlapping fields of fire to make it consistently harder for the CIS to simply get behind them. So essentially, the CIS want to form a wall and smash through it, while the Imperium wants to survive the initial punishment, spread out and tear the wall apart. But there's one bloody important question we haven't answered yet. Who actually has the better weapons and shields? Because tactics are all well and good, but when one side has guns that hit considerably harder and the other side has shields that can shrug off them, and that, lads, could determine the entire fucking space battle. So after all that, where do the shields actually stand? Well, surprisingly, this is basically a draw. Star Wars uses deflector shields split into different systems, with ray shields primarily dealing with energy weapons, and particle shields protecting against physical impacts, missiles, and other kinetic threats. They can be redistributed, concentrated, and depleted, and depending on the source, fighters and projectiles can sometimes bypass them entirely. They're versatile as hell, but their exact behavior is inconsistent enough to make a lore nerd develop a migraine. 40k takes a rather more brutal approach. Void shields can absorb incoming energy and shunt it into the warp, often with multiple layers protecting a ship. Individual generators can overload, bleed off excess energy and recover, allowing the vessel to keep fighting even after parts of its defense system have been compromised. They're excellent against substantial weapon fire and can even interfere with things like teleportation, but slow-moving attacks such as torpedoes and bombers can sometimes bypass them. So Star Wars has the more versatile shield systems, while 40k has the more brutal resistant ones. Both can be overloaded, both can be bypassed, both can be concentrated against, and both can recharge under the right circumstances. There isn't really a clear winner here, which unfortunately means we're going to have to look at something that actually decides this entire fucking space battle. The weapons, because ultimately, the fleet with the better shields doesn't matter if the other side can punch straight through them. So now we find out who actually brought the bigger guns. So after going through all of this, I genuinely think I'm going to give the weapons advantage to the CIS. And I know, looking at some of the weapons 40k can bring to bear, that sounds fucking insane. The Imperium has macro cannons, lances, torpedoes, and nova cannons capable of absolutely horrifying things to ships. But here's the problem. A weapon being more powerful doesn't mean much if the enemy can survive it and then shoot you 10 fucking times before you can reload. That's the biggest advantage Star Wars has. Rate of fire. Turbo lasers are energy weapons, meaning their ammunition isn't a giant lump of metal that has to be physically reloaded and fired. Their recharge times can be dramatically shorter, allowing Star Wars capital ships to put out a ridiculous volume of fire. That means the CIS ships can potentially get several volleys away in time before an Imperial ship is prepared for another major macro cannon salvo. And because Star Wars shields can withstand enormous kinetic impacts as well as energy weapons, the Imperium's big guns aren't an automatic deleting on CIS ships with every hit. Then we have fighters. The CIS has a fucking ridiculous number of them. A Lucrehulk and Providence can throw even more into the battle. If the Imperium escorts fail to counter them, those fighters can attack and exploit sections, overwhelming point defense, and potentially exploit the fact that void shields aren't perfect against slow attacks, craft, and torpedoes. The CIS also has ion cannons, which introduces another nasty possibility. Rather than trying to completely destroy an Imperial ship, they can attempt to disable its systems and potentially knock out void shield generators. The Munificents are probably the biggest threat in this engagement. 15 ships concentrating their forward-facing weapons on a single target could produce an absolute disgusting amount of fire, especially if the Imperium ships stay directly in front of them. The CIS's biggest weakness is get around those ships and their effectiveness drops dramatically. If the Imperial fleet can flank the forward formation, things get considerably uglier. But that's the problem with Imperial approach. 40k ships like to hit things real fucking hard, so Star Wars likes to keep shooting until the other guy stops existing. At an average fleet scale that we're using here, I think the second approach wins more often than not. So for a typical engagement, I'm giving the weapons advantage to Star Wars, not because the CIS has more powerful individual weapons, but because it has the combination of power, speed and volume of fire, fighters and versatility needed to actually exploit its weapons against an Imperial fleet. Now, if you start throwing the real fucking stupid 40k stuff into the equation, like rare archaeotech, specific super weapons, enormous battleships, and increasingly ridiculous fleet sizes, this could change rather quickly. Now, I do know there are many different variations of 40k ships with the classes I've given so far. There's also many different variations of Star Wars ships with the classes I've given so far, with slightly different tweaks, but I'm going with an average, so did you get your panties all on the twist in the comments? A little bit of a twist, lads, is fine, but too much, it's just unpleasant. But at the average fleet versus fleet level, lads, the CIS has the advantage. And honestly, I didn't actually expect to be saying that either. This is a Killer Studios editor note. Another thing that I've discovered when I was playing Battlefleet Gothic and Star Wars Empire at War, the Republic at War mod for this video, so that I could figure out how these ships compare together, well, I noticed something about 40k ships and weapons. You see, 90% of 40k's weapons can't actually get into fire. Like, you just can't do it with some of them. You actually have to turn the entire fucking ship to fire most of its weapons. You should be seeing on screen here, Battlefleet Gothic, I'm currently playing it, showing you how the Imperial weapons move, and as you can see here, most are forward-facing guns and most can't turn. Most are stationary or broadside weaponry. Now, let's move over to Star Wars, and let's look at Republic at War. And you see these CIS ships here? Here's a Munificence class, right here. And even though I've got it not facing the right way to the enemy, it can still shoot backwards. That's because Star Wars weapons can rotate 360 degrees more often than not. So not only are Star Wars weapons faster, but they also have the potential to shoot from any fucking direction. And you don't have to turn the entire fucking ship to get the majority of your weapons in range. So yeah, that's another thing I think that should be considered into this. But that's everything from Killer Studios edit note. Let's get back to the video. Right, let's move on to the ground. We've established that the CIS can get themselves established without immediately being turned into space confetti. So now we need to answer the next big question. Can they actually take a planet? We need to know how many ground forces they can bring, whether they can hold what they conquered, and perhaps most importantly, whether they can convince the locals that joining the CIS is a better idea than getting shot by the Imperial Guard. First, the numbers. I've looked around for the CIS military figures and holy shit! Apparently, at the height of the Clone Wars, round about the 3rd year time frame, the CIS supposedly had 1 quadrillion droids. That is a 1 followed by 12 bloody zeros. And apparently this is meant to include basically everything. Combat droids, maintenance droids, budge droids, and probably your mum's droid. However, that figure is also potentially propaganda. So rather than blindly accepting the largest number we can find, like I'd usually do, we're going to do what we've been doing through this entire video, using averages. The CIS roughly has 10,000 systems, according to Count Dooku, so let's work out the average planetary garrison. I couldn't find a solid CIS figure, but I do have an average garrison for the Republic, which is 5 tanks and 500 clone troopers. Count Dooku also stated that the droids outnumbered the clones 100 to 1. So, 500 times 100 equals 50,000 bastard droids. And for the vehicles, 5 times 100 equals 500 droid vehicles. That gives us an average CIS planetary garrison of 50,500 military assets. Now, There is another option. You see, about a year ago, I made a video on the Galactic Republic surviving 40k. It's nowhere near as detailed as this bastard, but it is still a good laugh, and you should go and fucking watch it. It's on screen here. And in that video, I calculated that the Republic roughly had 13.7 million active military personnel at its peak. Now, using our 100 to 1 ratio, 13.7 million times 100 equals 1.37 billion droids. Yeah, that's fucking stupid. Now, realistically, only about a billion of those would be ground forces, but a billion is still a rather fucking substantial number. So, can they take a standard Imperial world? Absolutely. Your average 40k planet is basically Earth with slightly more technology and slightly more reasons to hate your existence. Against that, the CIS has overwhelming numbers, orbital support, armor, and frankly an obscene supply of disposable robots. They aren't deploying a billion droids on every planet, obviously, but they don't bloody need to. Most conventional Imperial worlds simply aren't equipped to deal with that scale of assault. And holding it? Also surprisingly achievable. We've already established that the average CIS fleet is more effective than the average Imperial fleet, meaning the CIS can maintain orbital supremacy while digging themselves in, and once those droids are entrenched, removing them becomes considerably more difficult. But then comes the really interesting question. Can they win the population? Honestly, yes again. The CIS has something 40k desperately lacks. Living conditions that don't resemble industrial misery. The Tal have already demonstrated that offering humans things as radical as decent food, heaven forbid fresh air, and living without constant religious screaming can win people over. The CIS is comparatively far more attractive, even with all of its corporate bullshit. Religious worlds? Probably a nightmare for the CIS. Industrial worlds, pleasure worlds, agri worlds, and your average Imperial backwater. Give it a few months and people might start wondering why the hell they were even loyal to the Imperium in the first place. Yes, the AI might be a bit of a sticking point, and then they meet a B1 bastard droid and realise their new robotic overlords have the intelligence of a fucking brick. So, can the CIS conquer a world? Hold it and potentially turn its population to their side? Yes, yes, and ye bruv. And that's where things start getting real bloody interesting. Infrastructure and expansion. Once the CIS has established itself on, say, 5 worlds and roughly had 2 to 5 months to get its shit together, how quickly can they actually industrialize? Well, surprisingly, fucking quickly. The CIS only relied on around 10 major capital worlds for most of its industrial output during the Clone Wars, so establishing factories, orbital stations, and shipyards across a handful of captured worlds isn't exactly a massive stretch. Once those worlds are producing resources, the CIS can start replacing losses and building new fleets. Using the numbers we've calculated earlier, 35,000 capital ships, 160,000 mid-range ships, 630,000 fighters, and our construction times are these. For a fighter, it's 1 month, for a mid-range ship, it's 4 months, and for a capital ship, it's 6 to 12 months. And considering the CIS already had a galactic spanning industrial base, establishing something comparable across about 100 worlds is entirely reasonable. That's where things get fucking silly. Ground production is even more ridiculous. A standard droid factory can supposedly produce around 1,000 droids per planetary rotation. Obviously, new factories won't immediately operate at maximum efficiency, so let's be conservative and add roughly 2 days to droid production, 3 months for tanks and heavier equipment. Even with these handicaps, once the factories are established, the CIS can start pumping out military hardware at an absolute obscene rate. So, Can they expand? Yeah, easily. For the first year, I'd say 100 worlds is entirely reasonable, with 200 potentially achievable if everything goes exceptionally well. And that's where I'd say the snowball stops, because by this point the CIS is going to start encountering proper Imperial Navy resistance and, more importantly, the other factions of 40k. And that is where this whole fucking situation gets considerably more complicated. So there you have it, lads. Based on the metrics and the estimations we used through this video, I genuinely believe the CIS can survive the Warhammer 40k galaxy and expand pretty fucking quickly. In just 1 year, we've established that their average fleet can outperform the Imperial Navy. Their ground forces can conquer most worlds without too much trouble. Their ideology can win over parts of the population, and their industrial machines can start churning out an absolute absurd amount of military hardware. Truly a wonderful little robotic nightmare. Now, I really wanted to go into the other factions to see how they'd stack up against the CIS. The Orcs, the Tyranids, the Necrons, Chaos, and everyone else, but I didn't want this video to turn to a fucking feature-length documentary. So if you want a proper deep dive into how the CIS deals with the rest of the galaxy, 2,500 views and 150 likes, and I'll make another one covering the next 2 or 3 years of expansion. What happens when they encounter the other factions, and whether this glorious droid empire eventually gets its fucking teeth kicked in. But there's one more thing I have to ask from you lot. I want 10,000 subscribers by the end of this bloody year. We haven't had a real proper goal for this channel in quite a while, and frankly, my ego is no longer receiving the validation it fucking deserves. So let's fix that. If we hit 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, I've got a very special video planned. One that's actually been in development since I hit 1,000 subscribers, but I had to push it back because apparently you bastards decided to blow past that milestone way faster than I expected. So if you want to see that, like, subscribe, and help me reach 10,000 subscribers, lads. And of course, remember, just because 40k is bigger, has bigger ships, and has bigger fucking guns, doesn't mean it's better. Now have a killing day, you bloody legends, and I will see you in my next one.